Hello and welcome to round 14 here of Pro Tour Gatecrash. On our left, Lukas Jaklovsky from Slovakia. On our right, Guillaume Wafo-Tapa from France. This is a control mirror, and it's going to be a real masterclass in how control decks work.
I mean, honestly, if you're Guillaume, you have to be excited to be in a control mirror. Wait, what just happened? Did Jaklovsky just keep a no-lander?
We'll get a check back from our spotter on the floor in terms of the number of cards that we saw Jaklovsky mulligan down to. He has taken some mulligans. He looks a little sheepish as he's passing the turn without a play, but we'll
so his hand is lands, so I guess he's just drawing cards and conceding so Guillaume doesn't know how to sideboard.
Oh, that's smart. So he mulliganed so far down that he felt like he just had no possible way of winning game one.
Or did he not even mulligan and just says this matchup is so bad that I'd rather play sideboarded, knowing what my opponent has, than give him information to sideboard against me.
This is a very controversial line to choose, but given what we have the deck list in front of us, and I was looking forward in about sort of 10 to 15, 20 minutes time, having a great conversation about quite what Jaklovsky can do from his sideboard, because his sideboard is just about the perfect 15 to find an answer to Guillaume Wafo-Tapa's deck.
So we have to, well,
qualifiers for the next Pro Tour have begun. You could be on the big stage for Pro Tour Dragon's Maze, taking place May 17th to 19th in San Diego. For more information, visit wizards.com/PTQ.
So I've got to think that Jaklovsky's concession is a very intentional thing, because looking at his sideboard, it is almost entirely devoted to beating control decks like the kind that Wafo is playing. He's got 2 Counterflux, 2 Negate, 2 Dispel, Tameo, Jace, Snapcaster Mage, Psychic Spiral,
Let's
and 2
talk
copies
for a
of
second about Psychic Spiral, because we've already determined that the way that Guillaume Wafo-Tapa's deck typically wins is to force your opponent to run out of cards. And what does Psychic Spiral do to halt that plan?
Well, it shuffles your cards back into your deck and mills your opponent for that many cards, the cards in your graveyard. So if you have 15 cards in your graveyard, you cast Spiral, you get all of those cards back, and they have to put 15 cards from their deck into their graveyard.
And we don't really know quite how much Wafo-Tapa knows about Jaklovsky's deck. Not necessarily one who works in a big team who's known for sort of trying to find out what everyone in the room is playing.
Right.
There's a very real chance that he's going to be, even if he knows that Jaklovsky's on control, that he just doesn't have a great idea as to quite how bad this post-sideboard matchup can be.
And I'm looking at Jaklovsky's sideboard plan. So he's got 3 Pillars of Flame, 4 Searing Spear, 4 Supreme Verdict in his main deck that you have to think he wants to take out. His entire sideboard looks like it's geared to protecting the Psychic Spiral. You bring in one of those and another Snapcaster Mage. So now you have 4 Snapcaster Mages, meaning that even if your opponent's milling you and they mill your Psychic Spiral, you have access to being able to cast it. Then all you have to do is protect your Spiral with Counterflux, Negate, and Dispel to power through their counter magic. And if you Counterflux, they can't do anything about that. So it feels almost like a transformational sideboard from Jaklovsky.
This one of the most just innovative, smart uses of tactical information sharing, or not in this case, I think I've ever seen on the Pro Tour. A really, really just fantastic way of taking Guillaume Wafo-Tapa's plan and turning it on its head.
Well, this is one of those things that people always talk about, of like, oh, okay, you could concede game 1 and not give your opponent very much information. This may be the first time we have ever seen that on a feature match table.
And often when you say, oh, well, I'll concede game 1, you'll still play a land or two, and that's quite a lot of information to give away.
No, yeah,
It's
exactly.
possible that Wafo-Tapa here doesn't even know what colors Jaklovsky is. So Counterflux, for example, it's the red-blue counterspell that cannot be countered.
Right.
It wins a counter war, and it does have overload to potentially just completely blow out any offensive threats that Guillaume Wafo-Tapa tries to employ. But then on top of that, he's got the white side of things. I mean, he's less likely to be leaning quite so hard on that, but sort of. And how much sideboarding can Wafo-Tapa even do?
I mean, you do see him sideboarding cards. This is one of those times where, like, Jaklovsky, the gambit, as it were, like, what if Wafo was just seated near him earlier? What if he's got a scouting report for some friends of his? I mean, on one end, hiding the information isn't, like you know, you're not all in if your opponent knows what's going on, but, you know, there's only a certain amount of information you're actually able to hide in a format this big with this many players and with the cameras that are on you a lot of the time.
I mean, the most interesting card that Guillaume Wafo-Tapa has in his sideboard to potentially deal with the Psychic Spiral is Witchbane.
Right.
That there meaning that all of a sudden he can't be the target of spells.
Exactly.
And Psychic Spiral does target. So it causes you to shuffle all cards from your graveyard into your library for 4 colorless and a blue at instant speed. Then target player puts that many cards from the top of his or her library into their graveyard. Now, if you can't target Guillaume, this spell really just doesn't do anything.
Exactly, and neither does Drown Guard.
So we've just heard from the sidelines that Stephen Mann has managed to catch up with Guillaume Wafo-Tapa in winning a game. Guillaume, one of the faster wins that we've seen in video coverage history.
Earned it.
The turn 1 win, kind of. I mean, maybe he played a couple of turns, but it's very, very fast there as Jaklovsky just shuffling up and saying, we're going to go straight to game 2. But Mann now in a similar position, 1 game up against Eric Froelich.
All right, so they both presented, they're both shuffling each other's decks, and we might be able to see a full-fledged game of Magic this time around.
Jaklovsky, his back's against the wall now. He's got no opportunity for any further hijinks of a similar ilk. But given what we know about the potential from his sideboard, he's drawing nothing but good cards.
Right, yeah, there's absolutely no dead cards in his hand right now.
And Willie Adel from Brazil also a game up. He's playing against Paul Rietzel. But this game is now starting, and Jaklovsky, he's got lands. We'll see what spells he has very, very shortly.
I always have to appreciate the big rub-ins from Wafo of the constant all-foil decks that we see from him. The other thing I'm looking at, he actually has Time Spiral Think Twices. I wonder if those are the same ones that served him quite well at the Time Spiral Block Pro Tour that he managed to top 8.
That being Yokohama, which he won. Remembering the photo there from Craig Gibson in front of that Ferris wheel.
I was confusing it with Herbert Holtz.
Yeah, Herbert Holtz there made it to the finals, I believe, but could not trump Wafo-Tapa when it came to control decks.
You're absolutely right. The control mirrors, Wafo, a lot of experience.
That is certainly true, and we may well see that there's not going to be a huge amount of permanence on the board, jockeying for position in terms of card drawing. We see Wafo-Tapa here the 2nd time in a row using an Azorius Charm to draw an extra card, whereas Jaklovsky, he's been leaning on Think Twice thus far to keep cards in hand. Yeah,
you've got to expect those Azorius Charms to get cycled the overwhelming majority of the time in this matchup, but you still keep them in case Jaklovsky is worrying about attacking you with a creature or 2 every now and then. Yep. And they let the battle for incremental card advantage begin. Old school players and PTQ veterans who are wanting Magic to be about, marginal incremental advantage should tune in right now, because that is what this match is going to be about.
I can't help but think that a certain Mr. Randy Buehler would be in love with the way that this match is going.
Andrew Cuneo, just like concede right now, come to the feature match area and take a look at this.
I mean, one thing that we spoke a little bit about last round, very, very important in Control Mirror especially, making sure you hit land drops, because lands power out spells, and this is going to be a match where we're likely to see a flurry of counter spells at some point about resolving 1 or 2 key spells.
Now, Jaklovsky did not really want, he doesn't want to, discard right here, missed a land drop. That is huge. A lot of control mirrors are decided by who misses the first land drop. Not a whole lot there he's going to punish him with, as the players have designed their decks not to need to tap out. And we're going to see a Snapcaster Mage hit an Azorius Charm, so Jaklovsky probably going to be able to get some more lands. But still, just losing the card advantage of having to discard for your discard step and being a mana behind in a counter war oftentimes can be the entire game right there.
So Guillaume Wafo-Tapa here trying to figure out whether or not he's happy for Snapcaster Mage to come along. I mean, Jaklovsky will get a little incremental advantage here, drawing an extra card, gets a chance to perhaps get out of his land issues, and getting a counterspell out of Wafo's hand, not irrelevant either.
It's not. I really do like using the Dissipate right here, just because you know your opponent needs some more lands, and you might as well not have to worry about the threat of a Snapcaster Mage.
I mean, I guess that's the thing. Neither of these decks are the sort of decks that they're going to just win the game from nowhere when someone taps out. But sooner or later, the incremental advantages will add up, and just both decks kind of relying on decking. Once you start getting to the 5 mana around the time that Jace, Architect of Thought, Jace, Memory Adept becomes an issue, that's where things can get a little bit messy.
Well, that in-step Snapcaster Mage is going to do a very good job of forcing through this Jace Architect of Thought. Guillaume, a lot of people's plans after sideboarding involves Jace Memory Adept, so he may not have been counting on the 4-mana Jace. Going to sit here and draw Lukas a lot of cards right now.
Yeah, so the -2 ability being the one that's kind of the most exciting immediately. Let's see. It looks like Jaklovsky, though, protecting the loyalty on it. He's put it up to 5 loyalty. So until Lucas's next turn, whenever creature an opponent controls attacks, it gets -1 power till the end of turn.
Yeah, and I'm actually pretty surprised about +1ing it there. This gives Wafo a window to just cast Detention Sphere on the Jace and not be down any card advantage. And
that's see exactly that, yeah.
You know, I mean, Lukas, if he didn't plus it, he could, you know, the Jace could fall to an end-step Snapcaster by Wafo. But to me, Lukas really needed the lands there, too, off the Jace activation, so.
Possibly a little bit greedy there from Lukas Jaklovsky. He's already on a kind of a very bold line just from having conceded game 1 entirely. We will see whether or not he's able to draw the lands to get him out of the position that he's currently finds himself in.
Now you do see Supreme Verdict in Wafo's hand, or you just did, so Wafo still has some removal in play, or in his hand. But.
I guess the other thing that we need to think about, this Psychic Spiral plan from Lukas Jaklovsky, it cannot possibly win the game fast.
No.
It's relying on Wafo getting quite a long way into this match, getting a fair amount of cards in Jaklovsky's graveyard, and then getting hit by the Spiral. So the other thing about this plan is that him having conceded game 1 buys him a lot more time to enact this same plan twice in a row.
Now, what you're seeing right now from Wafo is actually very aggressive play. It's hard to think of control decks playing aggressively, but the Dissipate on the Snapcaster, you know, you're not going for the long game. You're looking to capitalize on the short-term advantage he showed you by missing a land drop. Then Snapcastering the Dissipate for a Sphinx's Revelation for 2 is saying, okay, you know what? I care about you being up even 1 card. And, you know, he's going to get a threat on the table to start making use of that Snapcaster. So kind of a bold line of play from Wafo, even though it's pretty straightforward on the surface.
And Wafo now actually with a threat on the board. It's the sort of thing that I don't know if I really expected to see too many creatures in play full stop, though obviously one of the key bits of utility you get from Snapcaster Mage is in being able to play a spell twice, but now he does get to attack in a little bit.
Right, and it does place the burden on Lukas to do something, and it means that you've got a creature on the board if Lukas were to ever play a Planeswalker.
A 9-turn clock, you know, will get there sooner or later. 9 turns, one would assume.
Right.
How many cards? 5?
I really love seeing that Psychic Strike from Wafo. It's just a card that's like totally constructed playable, you know, but it's just not something that I think a lot of people were playing coming into this event.
Not so many of the blue-black-white deck builds. We've seen a large amount of blue-white-green and indeed blue-white-red as Jaklovsky's playing. But we already know that, I mean, Guillaume Wafo-Tapa made the finals of the World Championships playing a blue-black control deck. He understands how these colors work together. Again, we find ourselves in one of the sort of staring contest elements of the control matchup. Each player slowly but surely drawing more and more cards. And at some point, the number of cards that you can have in hand at one point becomes a really important factor in the match.
Right. The maximum
sculpt a
hand size
perfect hand.
very relevant, especially with huge Sphinx's Revelations flying in every direction.
7 cards being the maximum you can have in hand. Neither player choosing to run a Reliquary Tower, the land that means that you have an unbounded hand size, limited only by how many you can draw with the likes of a Sphinx's Revelation.
Now that would be a metagame where Reliquary Tower advantage became a meaningful thing.
Wowza.
So we're seeing a pretty big Sphinx's Revelation, a revelation for 3 happening in response to Wafo's flashback Think Twice. Wafo lets it resolves. Now you may be asking, okay, well, why not 4? Jaklovsky really wants to keep open a Dispel for any shenanigans that Wafo might have of his own.
Dispel, pretty much the cheapest of all of the counter spells available, but that's because the only thing it can counter is instants. So
exactly.
Very, very good against Sphinx's Revelation, very good against other counter spells. They're all instants.
Right.
But a little bit more niche than perhaps some of the other options.
So we see the Snapcaster Mage slowly but surely nickeling and diming Jaklovsky's life total down. Are we going to see an Augur of Bolas right now too, presenting even more of an offensive 1-3 threat?
Turns out that Guillaume Wafo-Tapa, the beatdown, he's known for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Here,
famous beatdown player, Wafo.
The 1-3 Augur of Bolas gets him. That looks to be another Sphinx's Revelation, just in case. Backup.
Needs some more cards.
And Wafo, he does still have Supreme Verdict in his hand. Do we think that might be partly that he wasn't too clear on what Jaklovsky's deck was going to be doing?
Possibly, and it's possible he wants to just make sure he isn't gotten by any Snapcasters. I mean, he may expect a lot of Planeswalkers coming out of Jaklovsky. He probably does not expect literally the Psychic Spiral plan, but he wants to make sure that like he doesn't just die to some early value Snapcasters either.
Go ahead.
And Jaklovsky, out of the awkward land position he found himself at the start of this game, now consistently making a land every turn, meaning that with every turn, subtly, things like watching this Sphinx's Revelation, if it resolves, it kind of gets him a little bit closer to winning the game.
Now, Wafo boldly tapping out here at the end of Jaklovsky's turn for a Sphinx's Revelation, unprotected. I think he's got to say, okay, I've got another Revelation in my hand. I'm just going to draw a counter spell and maybe bait Jaklovsky into casting a smaller Sphinx's Revelation than he would otherwise.
Well,
yeah, we can see that Jaklovsky actually in a position where he, aside from the Snapcaster Mage, is a little bit light on permission. So,
right.
Guillaume Wafo-Tapa has successfully now pretty much run Jaklovsky out of counter magic, which is no mean feat.
That's exactly right, given the number of counter spells in Jaklovsky's deck after sideboard. I mean, all that said, you sort of have to spend the Dispel on the Revelation. Jaklovsky left a single mana open on his earlier Revelation, so Wafo kind of knew it was coming. It basically is a really expensive instant speed duress.
And Jaklovsky now with a negate back up again. That window of opportunity pretty small, but you know, on 12 life and kind of on a little bit of a clock now.
Now, it's interesting from Wafo's side, he's actually got 4 Think Twices and a Divination, so he can gain card advantage. He doesn't have to fight the big Sphinx's Revelation fights necessarily as much because he's able to get incremental card advantage in a lot of other ways.
Now, Jace Memory Adept, it seems possible could be the death knell for either player, really. With the Psychic Spiral plan, Jaklovsky not necessarily too worried about being milled out because actually that gets him closer to be able to just end the game in his own special way.
For sure. On the other end, you know, we've all been talking about milling with Nephalia Drownyard and Jace Memory Adept and Psychic Spiral. Jaklovsky is at 9 life, so he is facing a 3-turn damage clock on top of everything else.
And speaking of that Nephalia Drownyard, it is now doing something. Jaklovsky probably quite happy about that. Imagine if Nephalia Drownyard had existed back in the old days of these sorts of control mirrors. It really changes the entire face of them because as a land that can just force a situation of being able to take cards from the opponent's deck, put them straight into the graveyard, the control decks don't necessarily need to have a Serra Angel to attack with, like, as it was back in the days of the deck, or a Grave Titan. They can just say, you know what, I'm going to control the board, stop you from killing me, and then slowly but surely my lands can make sure
Yeah,
that you
I'm going to kill you
over.
with my lands. I definitely played at Nationals one year, a long time ago, a Bill Macy prison deck that beat my opponent with Millstone. I definitely wish that I did not have to cast the card Millstone and instead had an Nephalia Drownyard in my deck.
And actually, the way the very first Pro Tour was won, Michael Leconte with a blue-white control deck successfully decking Bertland Astray.
Yeah.
It looks like that plan's still perfectly reasonable some 20 years later.
With a few modifications, of course. It was very interesting at the end of the last turn. Guillaume tapped down to 2 mana, and Jaklovsky did not capitalize on that opportunity to resolve a revelation. I guess he just felt like he needed a little more than that.
I mean, he's on 6 life. He's going to have to either deal with the threats on the board. I say threats on the board, the 2-1 Snapcaster Mage and a 1-3 Augur of Bolas, or gain a bunch of life, or, you know, he will die pretty soon.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, both players have a ton of threats in their hand right now. Again, like you said, Jaklovsky managed to draw out of his unfortunate mana situation, but is still just a little bit behind right now.
And Jaklovsky has to be fairly happy to have that Psychic Spiral in hand rather than the graveyard. It not being the end of the world if it goes to the graveyard thanks to Snapcaster Mage, but at least this way he can completely disguise the plan that he has to deal with the threat of Wafo-Tapa decking it.
Yeah, exactly, and Wafo does not have anything like Duress or cards like that you frequently see being used to gain an advantage in the Esper Control Mirror. So Guillaume has no way of knowing about the Psychic Spiral plan, really.
Quick update from one of the other tables. We see Paul Reitzel squared things up. He's now 1-1 against Willie Adel, so that match will go to a decider.
Now, we're seeing Wafo use a Dissipate right now, I believe actually on the Boros Reckoner. Is that what's happening right here?
I believe so, yeah. That Reckoner going straight to exile, not resolving. Presumably this is just him protecting his win condition, which is beatdown.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's sort of consistent with the aggressiveness that we've seen out of Wafo's side. I mean, not frequently do you fight that hard over 3 points of damage.
And Tamio, the Moon Sage, the powerful Planeswalker coming down, it will be able to put a bit of a dent in Guillaume Wafo-Tapa's aggressive plan if he can resolve it.
All right, so we're seeing a Snapcaster from Wafo, presumably going to target that Dissipate. Extremely unlikely, in my opinion, for that to resolve. But maybe Jaklovsky is just saying, fine, I don't care. These are counters that are not going to be targeting my my Psychic Spiral.
And Jaklovsky with his own Snapcaster Mage there, meaning that he can get a creature on board to help protect Tamio while finding a counter spell to actually mean that the Tamio resolves in the first place.
It's removed.
Honestly, Tim, I'm seeing Jaklovsky's plan in action right now pan out perfectly. They're fighting over a bunch of things that I think Guillaume thinks matters. There's some judge ruling going on right now.
I think they were just checking to make sure that the card that got countered there actually got removed from the game, because it was a Dissipate that resolved to counter that last Dissipate.
But it seems like Guillaume is fighting over something that he thinks matters and is just not going to have anything at all when the Psychic Spiral hits. I mean, he's setting up his Jace, which ordinarily would be solid gold right here. You know, Tamio can't, it can tap Jace, but that doesn't really accomplish very much. And I think ordinarily you'd be like, okay, I'm going to mill you out, but I think he's honestly just walking right into that Psychic Spiral.
I mean, the best example yet at this Pro Tour of the value that we have of having access to all the deck lists, all the hand cams. We can see this very slow train wreck happening, potentially with Guillaume Wafo-Tapa right in the middle of it.
And he has enough power on the board that the Tamio is not really able to sort of deal with it entirely. I mean, Snapcaster Mage playing defense, and Guillaume can resolve whenever he wants to a pretty large Sphinx's Revelation. So this is by no means the actual game over, but I've got to say, like, Jaklovsky feels like he's walking Guillaume into a bit of a trap for me.
It's a merry dance that Lukas Jaklovsky is leading here, and Guillaume Wafo-Tapa, even if he does resolve a huge Sphinx's Revelation here, that's still kind of playing into the hands of the Slovak player.
And we're seeing the Jace come down now, and I've got to imagine Guillaume is going to try and hit Lukas for 10 cards. He's thinking about it, though.
Lukas with a little smile on his face there. A little bit of an acting job, probably quite important to Jaklovsky here. I mean, he doesn't want Guillaume to have any kind of a smell of what's going on here, because he needs to win this first game in order to tie the game and make sure that he can then enact the same plan again through a bit more resistance for game 3. We mustn't forget that Wafo-Tapa is currently leading 1-0, so Jaklovsky started this entire match not going to be able to drop a game due to his choice to just simply concede game 1.
Well, we also can't forget that Lukas is at 6 life and Guillaume has a lot of creatures on the board. I mean, I've kind of been saying, okay, and it looks like Guillaume in fact draws a single card with the Jace Memory Adept, kind of putting a foil to the Psychic Spiral plan. You know, Jaklovsky, a Supreme Verdict here, for example, would totally clear out all those creatures, but as we look at Jaklovsky's hand, he doesn't have it. He has a Sphinx's Revelation that may not resolve due to the Psychic Strike in Wafo's hand, and potentially a big Psychic, or a big Sphinx's Revelation too. So this entire plan we've been talking about the Psychic Spiral, assumes a lot when it comes to Lukas actually being able to draw a way to survive this onslaught of creatures. He does have a Tamio, though, that can draw him 3 cards right now.
Drawing cards, always good for either deck, until you draw a few too many in a simply decked, which perhaps, potentially, we will see from Guillaume Wafo-Tapa at some point. Probably worth pointing out that even when you're not against quite as extreme a control plan as the one that Guillaume Wafo-Tapa is running, that Psychic Spiral is still a potent threat, even against a normal sort of a more normal Sphinx's Revelation type deck. Quite often, if these games go long, there will be a number of cards in both graveyards, and shuffling them back in, pretty solid. With so many lands in play, you're going to be drawing far more spells than non-spells.
Absolutely. I mean, that's sort of the reason we used to see Elixirs of Immortality in decks like this. I mean, sometimes just shuffling back a lot of spells means that you're a lot more likely to draw a lot of spells.
And the milling side of it could potentially do quite a lot.
Now, we just saw Tamio tap Nephalia Drownyard. Jaklovsky has got to, at least seems to think he's got a plan against these creatures, and it might just be resolving Sphinx's Revelation.
I mean, tapping the Drownyard is a really smart play here in terms of selling this idea that he's worried about being milled. In point of fact, that's almost exactly the opposite of his concerns. But if he wants to keep Guillaume Wafo-Tapa playing into his hands, then that's a really smart play, I believe.
I completely agree. I mean, he also just sort of tapped Wafo a little bit lower to diffuse the total number of counter spells that he would have to worry about. Doing some really interesting sort of sub-gaming of what counters he can represent and what he can draw off the Sphinx's Revelation by keeping open 3 rather than 2 lands.
So the Sphinx's Revelation there, he's got the appropriate counter spells to resolve it. And in this case, Sphinx's Revelation also kind of a test spell.
Right. I mean, he did tap, by tapping the Drownyard, he did take away Guillaume's access to negate, which was obviously a potential answer there. In point of fact, Guillaume didn't have anything more than the Psychic Spiral, or sorry, the Psychic Spear. So Jaklovsky, up to a healthy 10 life. On the other hand, he did not cast quite as big a Revelation as he probably would have hoped to, given the amount of card advantage that Guillaume can gain and the amount of mana he has access to.
And Guillaume with a second Nephalia Drownyard. Now, even if Guillaume found a way to get Lukas Jaklovsky down to 0 cards left in his deck, Psychic Spiral is an instant.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
Very, very important. We're going to bring it up on screen for you in a second, hopefully. He can, in his upkeep, before he would draw a card, cast Psychic Spiral, put all of those cards in the graveyard back in his deck, and just kill off Guillaume Wafo-Tapa. There we see it. Some may sort of not have really looked at this return to Ravnica Uncommon too seriously prior to this match, but oh boy.
Yeah, it's a great plan. Now, we're seeing a Sphinx's Revelation for 4 from Wafo. A lot of mana up. Kind of a small Sphinx's Revelation in the scope of things compared to what it could be. But getting Wafo back up to 18 life, not that that is very likely to matter in this game.
I mean, the important thing, I suppose, being that it needs to work out that this Psychic Spiral resolves, because realistically, Lukas Jaklovsky is probably going to have just one shot at it at this point, because, you know, Jace can mill him pretty close to just stone dead.
Well, and we just saw Jace mill for 10. That is a lot.
Jaklovsky, not many cards left.
Wafo only 5 mana to fight over the Spiral with. And you gotta not be too upset if you're Jaklovsky right now.
Looking at Wafo's hand, he has just the Singleton Negate. He has a lot of land in that hand. He's got an Azorius Charm to potentially try and draw one more answer. But then on the other side of things, there's the Psychic Spiral. It has a Snapcaster Mage alongside it, which is functionally another counterspell, because with that much milling going on, there's definitely going to be a way that Jaklovsky can find a counterspell.
Yeah, I mean,
description.
I'm looking at the negate in Jaklovsky's graveyard right now. Jaklovsky may just have this. On his turn, he just casts Psychic Spiral. Wafo shows negate, and Jaklovsky Snapcaster Mages back his own negate, and that could be the game. First, though, he does have to survive this attack.
10 life. A detention sphere there on Snapcaster Mage.
Maybe Wafo is going to be attacking Tamio the Moon Sage.
It also removes all of Guillaume's Snapcasters.
Right.
So a kind of an interesting situation there that sort of actually it doesn't necessarily mean that Wafo can necessarily attack for quite so much. So possibly he didn't...
I'm not quite sure what happened there.
He may not have remembered the fact that his own Snapcasters were going to be affected there.
Yeah, that I don't know about that. But at any rate, I would be very, very shocked to see Jaklovsky not go for it right here. I mean, I feel like you just have to cast. The one thing that could happen is Jaklovsky say, I don't want to show you Psychic Spiral, and just figure out a way to deal with the Jace by casting one of his own Jace Architects of Thoughts, and just saying, okay, like you kind of, you know, killed a couple of your own Snapcaster Mages. I'm just going to win the old-fashioned way with my Sphinx's Revelation Snapcaster Mage Jace plan.
I don't think he's got enough cards left in his deck. I mean, there's 2 Nephalia Dranyons in play for Guillaume, so I'm not sure that anything other than the Psychic Spiral win is going to do it, but I can't wait to see how this next turn pans out.
Yeah, and let's not forget Jaklovsky has an active Tamio the Moon Sage. It can draw 3 cards right now. It can lock down one of those Drown Yards. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Tim. I think you kind of just have to go for the win right now with your Spear.
I mean, the classy thing with Psychic Spiral also, you can you can respond to a Sphinx's Revelation to deck them just before that Sphinx's Revelation
and they say
results.
like, okay, please draw some cards. Not going to argue with that.
So, Jaklovsky does draw extra cards with his Tamio there, that giving him a much better potential to be able to double counter to keep his Psychic Spiral resolving. He has enough lands to cast basically everything at this point. We have a few results for you just while we wait to see how this turn pans out. Paul Ratzel has won 2-1 over Willie Adel. Ben Stark 2-0 over Tom Martell. So just the one match, I think, still going in the feature match area. The Stephen Mann against Eric Froelich match just on the table to the right. But we will definitely not be leaving this match before we see its full conclusion, because this is one of the most exciting games I've seen at the Pro Tour in a while.
Yeah, I mean, you're not used to thinking of control mirrors like that, but there's been a crazy amount of just gamesmanship going on right now. You see Psychic Spiral negate from Wafo, Snapcaster Mage targeting his own negate, or I mean, whatever he chooses to target, it just has to be any counterspell.
Would be perfect.
Yeah, it is a negate, and that is going to be this game if I have counted the cards in the graveyard correctly.
So it's a lot of cards.
It's a lot of cards.
X equals a lot. Your library does not equal a lot.
Yeah, that we see why Jaklovsky's plan works. I mean, he really kind of set it up perfectly. Guillaume being very aggressive with his counter magic, very aggressive with the beatdown, but Jaklovsky able to draw out of it, and the plan worked.
That
So I
was a
figured that it's better
fantastic
to
game
just
of Magic,
concede.
Zach Hill.
I wasn't sure what you were playing. So.
You see them saying, I wasn't sure you were playing. I don't really know what just happened. Now, what I'm curious about, Tim, how are we going to finish the third game?
Game 2 is actually
Well,
fair.
At least he conceded game 1 immediately.
Yeah.
In principle, there is now still time for that third game. You can play Magic at a store near you every Friday. Earn Planeswalker points and battle against your friends in Friday Night Magic. February's FNM promo card is Reliquary Tower. Visit wizards.com/FNM to find a store near you. Now, Guillaume Wafo-Tapa, I think that he would probably quite like a Reliquary Tower in some of his control decks right now. It is in M13, it is legal in Standard, and with decks drawing this many cards, it might not be a bad choice.
No, I completely agree with that. You're talking about M13 cards. Cards are sort of relevant to that. Is Jace Memory Adept preventing M13 Jace from hitting the battlefield at all?
Now, one card that was really important in that match, ultimately it gave Lukas Jaklovsky the opportunity to be able to make sure that his Psychic Spell resolved Snapcaster Mage. Let's talk about this one.
Oh, it's not a bad Magic card. Snapcaster Mage, obviously, like the 2/1 body, it gives you additional redundancy. It allows you to access anything in your graveyard, makes cards like Thought Scour very good. You know, I mean, as the slide said, it won 5 out of the 7 standard Grand Prix in the year it first came out in 2012. And one of the things in matchups like this, with both players milling each other out using cards like Drownyard and Jace, it basically is like a demonic tutor, because your graveyard is going to wind up having like every single spell in your deck to cast in concert with Snapcaster. It also just means that if you have like 6 counterspells, 7 counterspells in your deck, you in practice have access to a lot more than that, because Snapcasters for just 2 additional mana can become counterspells. Now, on top of all of that, finally, if you need anything else, Planeswalkers are very good against control decks. Snapcasters can sort of calm down Planeswalkers and deal with those cards.
Yeah, I mean, Snapcaster Mage, Tiago Chan, instrumental in its design. He got the opportunity to help design that card for winning the 2007 Magic Invitational in Essen. Just a fantastic win for him in a top field against 15 of the other best players on the planet.
Yeah.
He got the opportunity to design a card, a fantastic prize. This is the one that he went with, and whoo boy, has it changed the state of constructed Magic.
Yeah, I actually worked with him on designing this card. I may have made it pretty good.
I'm sure he doesn't mind too much.
Yeah,
I've seen
exactly.
him sign more than 1 or 2 of these. Though actually his first chance playing with it was in Bilbao recently at the GP. He doesn't necessarily get a chance to play in as many Magic tournaments these days, and he was very happy to get a chance to play in a blue, white, red flash control deck.
No, yeah. Tiago playing Tiago.
There was a photo tweeted during that of him with 3 copies of Snapcaster in play with the caption, "A playset of Snapcaster Mage."
Y'all are very clever, you coverage people.
We do what we can where we can, but for this show, we're all on video. The text, not something I'm involved with this time, though. Nate Price, Josh Bennett, Blake Rasmussen doing a sterling job in the text. We're here on video. I'm Tim Willoughby here with Zach Hill. We're going to be going into Game 3 now, and now that Guillaume knows what's going on, and they're running to a bit of a clock, how do we see this final game going?
Well, I mean, honestly, similar to how Guillaume was playing in Game 1. I mean, he was playing very aggressive, countering early game advantage with his counter spells so that his Snapcaster's stuck, trying to keep Jaklovsky off lands. I mean, the thing is, like, Jaklovsky's plan is not going to win the game in time, I would have to guess. I mean, I may be wrong, but I'm looking at the rest of the featured match area and no one's sitting down. So I feel like both players are going to want to just put a threat on the board as quickly as they can and try and end the game in the time frame, because a draw is not what either of these players need right now.
They went through them shuffling and mulligans fairly quickly. Clearly, neither of them wants to be getting a draw in this spot. Looks like both of them there, at least initially getting their lands, and I think twice there from Wafo-Tapa, who's playing. You can see how much faster he's playing. He really wants to get this win.
No, and both these players, yeah. I mean, playing super tight, and now they know what each other's plans are. So it's a lot easier to be like, okay, this is the thing that I need to be doing.
Think twice flashback there for Wafo-Tapa, constantly drawing as many extra cards as he can. hitting every land drop, all these important things we've spoken about already for control matchup. But now the decision tree's shortened a lot because they know exactly what each player needs to do to win or lose this game.
So we see the Manor Gargoyle in Jaklovsky's hand. That's a card that can do a little bit of beatdown, particularly if Wafo-Tapa is cycling these Azorius charms as aggressively as he seems to be.
Yeah, I mean, Jaklovsky at this point, he has to know that there's the potential that he might just not be able to win the game by simply waiting on Psychic Spiral. It's too slow, not with the amount of time left on the clock. We're just trying to find out exactly how long that is for you. Manor Gargoyle, though, you know, 5 turns, it can just end things. So according to Rashad, our spotter, we have 9 minutes, 40 seconds left on the round. So 5 extra turns after that, but that's not a very long time to win a game of Magic the Gathering with these sorts of decks.
That is exactly right. Boros Reckoner can win the game in reasonably short order. But again, if you're Wafo, and let's take a look at his hand right here, you can't really just be really excited to be spending a counter spell on a creature that you could remove in any number of ways.
The Detention Sphere still in hand, a very good answer to Manor Gargoyle as and when it comes down. It's unlikely that there's going to be too many other targets, though Jace, Architect of Thought, also available for Lukas Jaklovsky.
So how do you feel about just jamming Jace Architect or Jace Memory Adept right here if you're Wafo? The only answer that Jaklovsky can muster is negate. You have to feel like he's not going to have 4 copies of negate. Do you feel like you just cast Jace and say, all right, show me the answer to it? Or do you play a little more conservatively than that?
It's tempting. I mean, we're in a weird spot in as much as we've got access to full deck lists and so on. He has seen a different Jace from Jaklovsky, and that another answer to the Planeswalker. He can Legend rule it out, or actually Planeswalker Uniqueness rule it out. You can't use Mirror Gallery on Planeswalkers.
I'm just now realizing that the Manor Gargoyle we saw was a remnant of the previous cards in hand metric. He does not, in fact, have a Manor Gargoyle. He has Snapcaster Mage, Negate, Counterflux. And the Boros Reckoner was the threat as opposed to the Gargoyle. So Jaklovsky not really going to be capable of ending this game in as rapid a fashion potentially as we were talking about at first.
Divination there from Guillaume Wafo-Tapa. He keeps the cards in hand coming. And if he plays a land every turn, he draws a few extra cards every turn. He will be able to get that incremental advantage. And we mentioned before that Guillaume, if he needs to, he can win a game fast. It's just that when he has a bit of time, he will take it.
That's exactly right. Now, Guillaume is out of lands right now. I mean, he's got a lot in play to begin with. We see a Devour Flesh for that Gargoyle that Guillaume may be aware of. Maybe also just for Boros Reckoner, not wanting to have to worry about spending a counterspell on it. An interesting question here. Does Guillaume tap out or just admit that he's about to miss a land drop?
Well, he's gone for an Azorius Charm to draw a card here. Obviously, he would love to be in a spot where he just can find that extra land. Doesn't look like that's worked out. Very smart sideboarding here from Guillaume Wafo-Tapa to adjust for game 3. Having the Devour Flesh in there, having a few answers to creatures, just so that he can address the fact that he knows that Jaklovsky knows that he has to win fast if he's going to win.
For sure. Now we see Guillaume discarding that Devour Flesh. He has a Snapcaster Mage in his hand, so I think he's thinking, all right, if I ever need to really kill a creature, I can just make sure to use a Snapcaster Mage.
The Snapcaster Mage, though, coming down pretty fast, because Guillaume would be quite happy to just, win by the beatdown and keep drawing extra cards, and he is the beatdown right now.
I am fascinated. Guillaume is tapping low, and Jaklovsky is not using that opportunity to cast Sphinx's Revelation. I guess he just is so aware of the Planeswalkers that Wafo could potentially punish him with that he is not, wanting to Sphinx's Revelation for something like 3 or 4. I guess the other thing he could be thinking about is, okay, I just need to wait and spend a longer time on my or cast bigger Revelations. But it's something you see a lot is early Revelations when the opponent taps low.
Tamiyo, the Moon Sage there, countered by a negate. That one of the promotional negates. So it's got full art there, no text on it, but a relatively straightforward spell anyway, countering target non-creature spell.
All right, so that Tamiyo kind of a bait for one of Jaklovsky's counter spells. Wafo setting up the Jace Memory Adept with representing at least one counter spell right now. Still a lot of action in both these players' hands. The Snapcaster is taking chunks out of Jaklovsky's life total, but Jaklovsky has a Detention Sphere if he wants to use it.
We started at 49.
This detention sphere here able to engineer it so that both of those Snapcaster mages out of play, exactly where I'm sure Lukas Jaklovsky would prefer to have them. We've just had an update on the timings. There'd been a little bit of a time extension. Our feature match area is sometimes running on a slightly different clock to the main event. So actually there's about 11 minutes left on this round. Nonetheless, not exactly as much as was used in the last game. So certainly not a position where either player can afford to hang about.
That's exactly right. I mean, they're going to have to work to finish this game on time. You know, Tim, I'm sitting here thinking, how savage would Unsummon be right now?
I mean, Dissipate doing the job and keeping the creatures in play, but yes, Unsummon, we saw a lot of play from variations on Unsummon in recent years in some of their aggro tempo decks. Not necessarily something you see quite so much of in the full-on control decks, though.
Now, Wafo, again, burning one of his counters to protect his threats, just trying to end the game, getting Jaklovsky down to 10. You have to wonder if he's going to use his Jace to take one of Jaklovsky's counters, just like we saw with the Tamio last turn.
Yeah, possibly Guillaume here looking to get revenge about sort of... In the last game, Lukas definitely did the rope-a-dope. He let Guillaume think that he was on one plan for much of the game and then ultimately was on exactly the opposite. Here, Guillaume really wants to just be the beatdown, and he's just putting out extra threats that he doesn't really care too much if they disappear, because he's the one with points on the board that are swinging in.
Right, exactly, and he's still got, you know, another Jace, Detention Sphere, Psychic Strike, and of course Sphinx's Revelation. We've seen players tapping out on their main phase. It's important to remember this matchup always punctuated by the threat of huge Sphinx's Revelations that can put players so far ahead that none of the rest of the cards really even matter all that much.
It looks like this updated speed of play might mean that some of our hand recorders are getting a little bit behind us. I think I see a Sphinx's Revelation in Jaklovsky's hand there, and that will certainly change the face of things just a little bit. We will see if we can check that just in a second for you, but I mean, at the moment, that is a Jace Architect of Thought being played by Jaklovsky. It looks like there is a Sphinx's Revelation there in Jaklovsky's hand. And he's going to be able to potentially reload with that. So that 10 life potentially actually, yeah, it's kind of more like 20 really, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's exactly what Jace does, is stop the bleeding a bit. I really like the Jace Architect of Thought out of Jaklovsky's deck right now. It gets in before Jace Memory Adept and means that Wafo's, you know, Augurs of Bolus and Snapcasters that he might use to apply pressure just really aren't accomplishing very much in the scope of things.
So, I mean, Wafo-Tapa still does have the other plan. His Nephalia Drown Yards are active. He's already seen him put a few cards into Jaklovsky's graveyard. But he knows now that Psychic Spiral is a thing. He needs to at least vaguely bear in mind that. Though, in principle, if he can get far ahead enough on milling, he might end up with enough cards in his deck that he can still kind of make things work. That's true.
I mean, and he can, because, like, again, like you were saying, there's multiple axes going on. He is threatening with damage, but their primary plan, you have to think, for both of them is to deck one another. Now, we see the Detention Sphere on Jace. That doesn't mean, though, that the trigger that Jace places on attacking creatures goes away. So Jaklovsky's still just taking 2 damage instead of 4.
So effectively, Guillaume Wafo-Tapa 2 attacks away from winning this game and indeed match. It seems unlikely that it's going to work out exactly like that. Jaklovsky with the Sphinx's Revelation to go up to many life, plus a Snapcaster Mage in hand, and I think he might also have a negate there.
That
so
negate
he's got
is huge.
Loads of ways of stopping opposing threats from Wafo-Tapa.
And just being able to cast Snapcaster Mage, even on an Azorius Charm, would be huge right here for Jaklovsky, too. Just cutting the clock in half, getting a card ahead, trying to figure out a window in which he can try and force through a Sphinx's Revelation. On the other hand, Wafo in the envious position right now of not really needing to take the first move. It looks like he's going to try to with a Jace Memory Adept, though, but I feel like if you're Wafo, you say, okay, I've got counters, you've got counters, I don't need to do anything, but you do. How about I let you make the first move so I can cast the first counter spell?
So he's definitely giving Lukas the option here of playing a counter spell, and Lukas on 4, if he thinks he's going to die to Snapcasters anyway, then does he just let this resolve and say, I need these counters more for my Sphinx's Revelation?
Well, something very smart about the play Wafo made, though, is if Jaklovsky's plan is Sphinx's Revelation, he cannot let that Jace sit on the board and mill him for 10 cards. Because otherwise, what is Revelation going to do? You're going to draw 5, 6, 7 cards with it. But if you get milled for 10 more, all of a sudden you're not going to have time to take advantage of those cards before you just run out.
Unless you say that actually all I need to do is resolve the Psychic Spiral again.
That's true. You still have to access it. He does have the Snapcaster, but...
he has Snapcaster in hand, so that means that if it gets milled, he's got it. If he draws it off Sphinx's Revelation, he also has it. Now, as it turns out here, Jaklovsky is going for it with Sphinx's Revelation, and that looks like a negate from Jaklovsky. Negate comes back.
And we're seeing him tap out now for
There
a Psychic
is
Spear.
the Psychic Strike on the negate from Jaklovsky. So that potentially the end of the game there. All of a sudden, Sphinx's Revelation from Jaklovsky not happening. He's on 4 and facing down a lethal attack.
And the other thing that having Jace does is simply allow you to prevent your opponent's top deck Jace from drawing them into any cards. We see Wafo aware of the Psychic Spear, only milling Jaklovsky for 1, drawing a card. That's like if Jace just acts as Honden of Seeing Winds, still very good. Drawing 2 cards a turn in the control mirror is not exactly weak.
Yeah, drawing twice as many cards as your opponent consistently every turn, that's hard to keep up with. And
So gain 4.
that is a desperation Snapcaster Mage into Sphinx's Revelation.
Go.
Let's see what he draws.
A desperation, draw 6 cards, gain 6 life.
He had to get it done there, because if he didn't get it done there, it wasn't going to get done.
That's
Many
exactly
times,
right. It is exactly. It's a finish that looks sculpted and that you would be very, very happy about if your opponent couldn't fire a Revelation at you right back.
So Lukas buying himself a little bit of time here. He has time in terms of life total, possibly not so much time in terms of minutes left on this game.
Also true.
Each player playing at a pretty brisk pace. We've got through a lot of cards in this game, considering the fact that they've been on a real clock.
So it's kind of a fascinating turn for Wafo-Tapa right here.
16.
He wants to unload a giant Sphinx's Revelation. He also doesn't want to expose himself to Psychic Spiral, meaning his Jace can't just sort of mindlessly mill Jaklovsky. But it's kind of what he wants to do, given that his damage plan is unlikely to be good for the game right now, with Jaklovsky at a semi-healthy 8 life and a Snapcaster Mage back to block.
Yeah, this a really tough spot for Jaklovsky to be in. I feel kind of sorry for him, because game 1, effectively game 2, was just a masterful choice, and something that has to be respected as one of the most unique lines I've seen on the Pro Tour. It will be unfortunate if this game does go to time for both players, and for us. But
Right.
if Guillaume is able to finish things off here, then fair play to him. He's had a great match.
Now, Guillaume, Jaklovsky was able to resolve Sphinx's Revelation for 6. Guillaume able to resolve it for 8, but having to tap out in the process. So we've kind of entered the haymaker phase.
Big Sphinx's Revelations on both sides of the board now. Life totals on Guillaume's side were never a big factor, but they are even less of a factor now due to them being even higher.
Now, something that we haven't talked about but need to remember, Jace's ultimate involves forcing any number of players to draw 20 cards. So he's sort of nickel and diming up to the ultimate 1 card at a time. But the second that he uses that, Jaklovsky's just dead. I don't think he has 20 cards to work with right now.
Yeah, and Jaklovsky does not currently have a Snapcaster Mage in hand, which would be the one out that he would have of going, right, I'm completely out of cards, Snapcaster, get back my Psychic Spiral you before my draw step.
Well, except that Jace's ultimate actually makes you draw the cards.
Oh, wow. Sorry,
Right.
I misremembered exactly how this card works. Yeah, because you have to draw 20 cards, the moment that you try and draw any one of them and you don't have any cards left, that's the game over.
Exactly. I mean, you're still right that if he, had 21, 22 cards, or if he had exactly 20, it wouldn't quite be there. But yeah, Jace Memory 8-Up can quite literally end the game with a single activation.
They don't call them ultimate abilities for nothing.
Now, is Jaklovsky setting up his Magma Quake right here? He's got one copy in the deck. It looks like he's looking to tap a lot of mana. He's got to do something about that Jace, and this could incidentally deal with the Snapcasters in the process.
Magma Quake dealing X damage to each creature without flying and each planeswalker. That's pretty much all the things that he wants to deal damage to.
Yeah, exactly.
Certainly doesn't want to deal damage to himself, and not really a great deal of point dealing any to Guillaume Wafo-Tapa. So he's cast his... a shame really there that he had to cast his Boros Rekna after the Magma Quake.
Right.
He wouldn't have minded potentially getting damage across just on one side with it, but as it is, he has a threat on the board for what it's worth, and he's still alive, which is worth a lot more.
Now, we're kind of back to where we started. Wafo, no real threats of any kind. Jace not able to put together a lot right now. He's got the Devour Flesh for Jaklovsky's Reckoner, so he's not going to be in any sort of real threat from that card. Also at a healthy 24 life.
There's one card in Guillaume Wafo-Tapa's hand, though, that I do want to talk about because it completely changes the strategy that Lukas Jaklovsky is working with. So we're just going to jump across to Wafo-Tapa's hand there. 3 down from the top. That is he just casting it now? That is Rest in Peace. Now, what does that do to the Psychic Spiral plan?
Well, it laughs at it.
This is turn 0.
So that's time just called on the round. This is the last turn before they go to their 5
Turn
turns.
1.
There's no cards in graveyards anymore. Cards just don't go there anymore. Immediately get exiled if they would
They
normally
don't
go
even
to the
hit
graveyard. That means that Psychic Spiral no longer a part of this game. 24 damage. Lukas Jaklovsky in the first of his 3 remaining turns of the game. Guillaume's going to have 2 turns left. Could this game end up going to a draw?
It very easily could be a draw. Wafo doesn't have any threat on the board right now. He's got a Drown Yard, but Jaklovsky has a fairly substantial number of cards on the battlefield. And Guillaume doesn't even have a graveyard to get tricksy with anything like a Think Twice or something to that effect. Guillaume just has a bunch of reactive cards right now. So, I mean, Jaklovsky's threats aren't going to stick. Wafo's at 21 life. The Psychic Spiral plan is invalidated right now. I don't really know how Jaklovsky could win. But on the other hand, Wafo has to win. And if he runs out of turns, even if Jaklovsky has no cards in his deck, if he has to pass the turn, Jaklovsky can't even take his draw step, and the game would end up in a draw if it comes to that.
So, Lukas Jaklovsky here, a couple of creatures in play. Doesn't look like they're going to be able to deal 21 damage in the next 2 turns, barring a big burn spell on the Boros Rekna. And a Supreme Verdict, meaning that Rekna no longer part of the equation. Mana Gargoyles, Indestructibility, meaning that it's going to hang around for a little bit.
Exactly.
But yeah, this game looking increasingly likely to go to a draw. This being turn 3 of 5, so Lukas Jaklovsky will have 2 more turns. Wafo-Tapa just the 1.
Thanks, boss.
We're seeing that Mana Gargoyle. It looks like it can attack for 4, and that's probably what Jaklovsky's going to try to do, but Wafo can Devour Flesh at any point in time. So, I mean, you have to think Wafo's plan is not do anything but end step, Drown Yard you twice, my turn, Drown Yard you twice, and hope I can mill enough cards to actually win the game on your draw step.
It seems like it might be a forlorn hope, but that's the best that he's got at this point.
We're seeing a Jace Architect of Thought. If you're Wafo, you have to say, all right, please activate that.
I don't think that Jaklovsky's going to fall for that one.
No.
He will take 6 cards off the top of his deck, put them in his graveyard for an Ophelia Drown Yard.
Did we just miscount earlier? I mean, Jaklovsky's deck looks awful small. If Wafo taps out, does he have it?
We'll find out soon enough. I think the safest thing to do is to leave it to the Frenchman, see exactly how this works out.
He's casting an Azorius Charm, so it looks like he's trying to at least dig for something.
He's certainly not giving his creatures lifelink.
And it looks like he just drew a land, nothing terribly relevant right there.
I guess that if you can find a third drown yard with this digging,
Right.
that's very relevant. So he has to think carefully about exactly how many lands he's tapping for all of these spells, but assuming that he can keep just enough mana in play. So he's detention sphering the mana gargoyle here. I guess that's signaling the fact that it's not possible for him to win the game by decking.
All right.
The players shake their
So please,
hands.
gentlemen.
That's a draw. So that was one of the most bizarre matches that I've seen, but an amazing match on both sides. But we're going to jump straight back to the booth now, to the desk now, because that was a long match. We want to make sure we keep things running as we get close to the top 8 here at Pro Tour Montreal.
Hello everyone, welcome to the news desk. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk together with Brian David Marshall, the Pro Tour historian, as we close down on the top 8. So Brian, we're starting into the realm of pieces of paper and results coming in here. So let's take a look at some of the results that have come in. And remember, we started the day saying the 4th loss is where things start to get really, really critical and you're starting to be a bit on a wing and a prayer. We don't guarantee that someone on 12 and 4 won't make it in.
Players on the floor certainly believe that multiple players on X and 4 are going to make it in.
Quite. But it certainly puts you right on the boundary of certainly can't lose the 5th.
Right. And not as many players with X and 4 who won't make it in.
That's right. So let's take a look at some of the results that have come in this round so far. Let's take a look. Here's your scoreboard. Now, Melissa Datura is at 11 and 2. That continues to pace the field. In that round, she faced Owen Turtenwald of the United States. And you see, bottom left there, Owen is now up to 11 and 2 after he defeated Melissa Datura, handing her just her 2nd defeat of the weekend. So as a rough guide, Brian, if either of them win their next round and go to 12 and 2, they're then in the realm of starting to look at draws here and there?
Yeah, it's with 2 rounds to play.
With 2 rounds to play.
Yeah, they could probably draw a draw at that point.
All right. So that's kind of where you're looking at for them. Now, Tapia Becerra, Felipe, the Chilean, he is now up at 10 and 3. See him on the right of screen. And the reason he is there is that he defeated,
Samuel Estradi.
Wow. So that is
Pro Tour Philadelphia champion.
So that may be the end of Samuel Estradi. We'll see. Certainly puts him right on the brink. Now, Roberto Gonzalez is coming into our mix. He's not up on our board there, but that's because he's climbing up the standings. He is now at 10 and 3, and the man that is the expense of is Don van Ravenswij of the Netherlands, the PTQ winner from Melbourne.
That was excellent.
Thank you, bless you. Been practice. Goodness knows, we've had enough time to practice. You expect with someone like that, maybe we mentioned him a couple of times on day 1. He blasted his way through day 1. I think it was 7-1 overnight, but he has fallen away and will not, we think, be making top 8, but nonetheless, a creditable performance to him.
And again, remember, playing in his first Pro Tour.
Absolutely. Now, on the right of screen, from Sweden, Joel Larsson. Bit of a roller coaster for Joel. He started out 3-0 in draft. Then he picks up his standard deck, he goes 3-0 in standard. But then the last 2 rounds of yesterday, he loses both. In our late night show, when we sort of wrapped it all up, we kind of picked a couple of 6 and 2s.
Yeah.
We were interested in. And I said, well, I'm going to stick with Joel because, you know, he's been around, he's a good European pro, and he is now up to 10 and 3. What that does mean is that another young American, Steve Rubin, drops to 9 and 4. And you've been talking with Steve through the weekend.
Sure. Steve's a Pittsburgh-based player, someone who's worked with Andrew Cuneo, has been around the Grand Prix circuit a lot, and worked with Team Luxurious Hair, which is the name of the Ari Lax, Craig Wesco, Adam Yurchik, et cetera team, and Harry Corvesi, one of the players who got a special invite to this event.
Okay. Now, Gianluca Spanu of Italy, he is 10 and 3 at the expense of Robbie Bolick. Robbie Bolick drops to 9 and 4. A huge match in that last round was Ben Stark of Team Channel Fireball against the erstwhile fireballer from Star City Games, Tom Martell.
A rematch of the Pro Tour Paris quarterfinals.
That's right, which eventually Ben Stark, of course, edged out the Core Blade Mirror. They went on, and there was a good 2.5-hour quarterfinal that day. Ultimately, not only does Ben Stark win the quarterfinal, he goes on to claim the title there. So Ben Stark wins that one.
So he espers in this case versus Tom Martell's Human Sacrifice, the Aristocrat stack.
Right. So Stark at 11-2, Martell at 10-3. That means they're both very much alive. Stark, a co-leader of the tournament.
Probably needs one win to start thinking about top 8. Tom Martell really needs 2.
Absolutely. He needs to go 11-3, 12-3, then have a look at the standings. Now, we haven't mentioned Lukas Jaklovsky of Germany very much this weekend. I'm afraid we may not very much more. He was at 9-3, but now he's at 9-4, and he actually got paired up, sort of beyond his pay grade, if you will, to one of the co-leaders of the event on the left-hand side of the screen. Jerry Thompson is now 11-2.
Wow.
We brought him in this morning. He was poised very nicely overnight, belted his way through draft.
Can we cut the field right now? Can we just do a cut to a top 8? Melissa, Ben, Jerry, Stephen Mann, Owen Turtenwald, Eric Froelich, Isaac Egan.
Okay, no you can't. And let me tell you why you can't. I won't let you because the 2006 world champion from Japan, Makahita Mihara, is on the warpath. He was 8-3-1, one of those players with draws. Remember, we've been talking about Timothée Simoneau from France, the Grand Prix London winner. Well, Mihara played him, as you'd expect, in the draw bracket, if you will. Mihara wins that. He goes to 28 points, and when we update our scoreboard for next round, you'll see that Mihara sort of crept in to the reckoning, because as each of these fourth losses come down, we start weeding the likely contenders out. Gabe Carlton Barnes is still in there fighting. Yeah, absolutely. He's not on our leaderboard, but he's closing in. As players lose, they get replaced in the top 16. So Jerry Thompson we know, and then the highlight of the round must clearly have been the match between Owen Turtenwald and Melissa Datora.
Absolutely.
In the last rounds, what they do is you see the top tables are all put together, so you can go and watch tables 1 and 3 and 4 and 5.
There was a big crowd around that rail. There's a rail that keeps people away from the players, and people were really pressed up against it.
Okay, so what does all that mean? Brian, we have the standings with 3 rounds to go, so we don't need to speculate now. We can actually see the full standing. So give us your virtual top 8 with 3 rounds to go.
Virtual top 8, Melissa Datora, Ben Stark, Jerry Thompson, Stephen Mann, young player from Tampa, Florida, Owen Turtenwald, Eric Froelich, Isaac Egan, Australian national team, Italian player Gianluca Spanu is in 8th place.
Okay. In 9-16, Joel Larson, Felipe Tapia Becerra, Alex Gerlach, Roberta Gonzalez, Tom Martell, Dave Shields. Those are all on the 10-3 brigade. And then you have Mihara on 28. And then we're down to the 27s, led by Donald van Ravensvaai of the Netherlands. Now, the 27s, as you said, on the outside looking in with the 4 losses. Right now, the number of players on 27 begin with Van Ravensvaai on 16th place.
Ends with Andreas Nordahl.
And where's he?
He's in 42nd place.
Right, okay. So he's right the way down. Now, realistically, just to give you a guide to tie breaks, Nordahl's tie breaks are 47.5%. Van Ravensvaai...
They're tie-broken.
Tie-broken, indeed. Van Ravensvaai at the other end, 66. So that's the range of tie breaks you've got within the bracket that is going to be fighting furiously in the last 3 rounds. That's tough to say as well as do, to get into the top 8. So, Datora, Stark, Thompson, Mann, Turtenwald, the 5 on 11-2. Then you have 30 points, 10-3. Eric Froelich, Isaac Egan, Gianluca Spanu, Joel Larson, Felipe Tapia Becerra, Alex Gerlach, Roberta Gonzalez, Tom Martell, and Dave Shields. And then the 15th player who might well be in his own destiny.
And Rich is not at all excited about this.
Makahita Mihara. No, completely unbiased. And do you know what else I'm not unbiased about? That's getting to some more magic. Ready for round 14?
I'm absolutely ready for round 14, 15, and 16. Let's get this going.
Round 14, starting now.